Andy, my dude, have you heard of the magical website builder known as Squarespace?
Ugh, not another Squarespace ad. I feel like every podcast is sponsored by them.
Hey, don't knock it till you try it. Yes, okay, it is overhyped, but actually it lives up to the hype. Squarespace is like a website fairy godmother. With a click of a button, your site transforms into a beautiful masterpiece.
A website fairy godmother? That sounds interesting. What makes it so magical?
Well, for starters, those slick templates make anyone look like a professional web designer. Pick one, customize the colors and fonts to match your brand, and voila. Plus, the drag and drop fluid engine is so easy, your grandma could build a site on Squarespace.
Well, she did knit me a lovely scarf last Christmas. Maybe website design is next.
Exactly. And when you're ready to sell your Nana's handmade scarves online, Squarespace has built-in e-commerce. Add a store with one click. Get flexible payment options. Then watch those sales roll in. And when she wants to teach others her steezy scarf skills, Squarespace's new courses feature is just the ticket. Nana can set up her curriculum and enrollments and payments in a snap and become the next e-knitting influencer.
Oh, wow, you really sold me with the grandma angle. Sign me up for that free trial.
Just go to thenextreel.com/Squarespace and transform your site into a beautiful Squarespace masterpiece.
Well, thanks, Pete. Even though it's overhyped, Squarespace actually sounds perfect for Nana's site's needs. Appreciate the warning on the ads, though. I'll brace myself next time I listen to a podcast.
Anytime. Let me know if you need any help getting that site up and running. Andy, can you believe we've almost hit 700 episodes of The Next Reel?
I know, it's crazy. And with all the other episodes in our family of podcasts, we are well over 1,200 episodes of movie conversation. It's really pretty amazing that we've gotten to have these in-depth movie chats every week for over a decade now.
And we couldn't have done it without our loyal community of film fans. Their support over the years has meant so much.
For sure. That reminds me, we should give the merch store a shout out. Buying shirts from thenextreel.com/merch is a great way listeners can continue to support the show. Plus, they get to sport our great designs.
Absolutely. I think sometimes folks forget we have a variety of shirts, mugs, phone cases, and more available. In fact, a great place to start is with a shirt sporting the Next Reel's logo.
We also have that classic Fast Times Spicoli Surf School tee, or the weirdly popular Rusty's European Tour shirt.
The one from National Lampoon's European Vacation. Why is that so popular?
Search me, but we have sold a ridiculous number of those. I guess there are a lot of Rustys taking trips to Europe?
We're always adding new designs based on movies we've covered, like our brand new design for a streetcar named Desire, featuring a streetcar named Desire. So if you want to rep your love of TNR and films, head to thenextreel.com/merch.
Every purchase helps us continue to have these weekly in-depth conversations. So visit thenextreel.com/merch today.
And as always, thanks for listening and being a part of the Next Reel community. We've got lots more great movie chats coming your way. I'm Pete Wright.
And I'm Andy Nelson.
Welcome to The Next Reel. When the movie ends,
Our conversation begins.
Rififi is over, so it's time to Fifi again.
Mon homme est un type à la cool. Toute la sainte journée, il se les roule. Il a beaucoup de philosophie, mais il aime trop la rififi. À peine un autre gamme fait du gringue, qu'il pose la main sur son flingue. Redresse son galure et vas-y pour un petit coup de rififi. Je voudrais m'en mêler, mais du
Andy.
doigt.
Pete.
Rififi.
Or du rififi chez les hommes. Is that how you say it?
Du Rififi chez les hommes.
Chez les
Yes.
hommes,
Yes. And it is based on the book by I lost it. Auguste Le Breton,
Yep.
I believe, and it is widely decried as a terrible book. In fact, I think it was Truffaut who said that this is the best crime movie made out of the worst crime book that he's ever seen or read.
Wow.
And yes, I mean, this is a real high-low kind of experience. with this one. I've never read the book, don't know much about the book other than what I have read researching this. It does indeed sound like a terrible book.
Well, it definitely sounds like Le Breton was one of those authors who cranked a lot of material out. I've never read anything of his, but
once you've written that much, eventually you have to write a book that's a crime story about racism between North Africans and Europeans, and also necrophilia. So eventually, you got to shoehorn it all in there.
It all gets there in the end, doesn't it?
That's right.
Yeah.
What is interesting about that one, and Rififi is difficult to translate. It's one of those kind of nonsense words that has come to represent like fight, trouble. If you look up the translation, it's like fisticuffs. But it's a very sort of term of a certain era, and that era is not today. So even from the title, we are dated.
It was at the time when the film was made. Apparently, it was an expression used where they even had to have a song in the movie defining what it meant, just so people knew when they're watching. Oh, that's what it means.
Right. That's right. That is right. I can't think of another. Please, let's not make this a list candidate. Movies whose titles are explained in song. It might be this and James Bond movies, possibly. I don't know that the movie needed the song. The movie holds up for me. It was an incredibly rewarding experience watching this thing. For what I have read about what it took to get the movie made, it was some real hijinks at work, and boy, does it pay off. How did it hit you?
Yeah, this is a really just a tense kind of crime thrill ride that was a very enjoyable watch. It is it's all these are crime films that we're talking about. They're about characters who are not necessarily the most likable of characters, and we certainly have that with this cast that we're looking at here as they decide to pull off this heist of this jewelry store, which it becomes such a thrill as you watch them kind of put the plan in place and then execute the plan, which is a very extended portion of the middle of the film, and then all of the stuff that it's kind of building to as after they have finished and kind of the resolution of everything. It felt very I don't know. It was an exciting thrill ride of a film that really delivered on everything that they had going on, and it's interesting that Kubrick's The Killing came out, I think, the very next year after this. I don't know if he had seen this or not, but it just I can't help but feel like this type of crime story with double crossings and trouble and struggling to actually get the plan to work. All of it just seemed like it was in the air at the time. It was a thrill. I absolutely loved this film.
Well, I almost wonder if we needed a trope corner for this discussion, because we do have some wonderful turns in this movie that have been used extensively since and prior to, but this movie just really highlights and does exceptionally well some of the things that we've come to expect I should say canonically in these kinds of crime films. The smash and grab opportunity of a lifetime, presented to a recently released former crook. The girlfriend hooked up with a gangster while you were in prison. What? Oh, no. Say it ain't so. The turn where the news about the girlfriend has made our hero change his mind, and now he has to up the ante and go for the safe crack and decide to do it anyway. And I just have to steal this one more ring for my girl. Caesar, you idiot. Like these are the things that we've come to expect. And I think if you're going to outline, things that you expect from heist movies, you're going to get it. You're going to come up eventually with this movie. It's 1,000 monkeys with 1,000 typewriters can eventually write this movie. But I love the way Dassin has presented it, and I think the real highlight for me, which I thought was going to be a real snooze, it is the heist itself. It's essentially, what is it? About a quarter of the movie is this silent heist, like Nat Sound heist, of them breaking into this apartment upstairs, digging through the floor, and breaking into the jewelers below. I thought that was riveting.
And the fact that it is played out with just all the natural sound, like you said, it made it all the more thrilling because it had the tension as you're kind of watching what they do, and just the fascination of how they did everything, how they kind of were chipping away at the floor, and then once they had a hole, they kind of stuffed an umbrella down and then opened it so they could catch all the pieces and not set off the alarms. It's just like, how clever was that? And even just watching them, how they lowered the safe to the floor, I found really fascinating. You know, the weight of it and how it was a very difficult thing to kind of get it down to where they needed so that the safe cracker could drill into the back of it. I mean, it was just all really fascinating. Oh, and then I couldn't help but think of the film we talked about last week, Le Trou, and how long it took them to pound through that floor, which they eventually do. Same thing here. How long did it take that safe cracker to drill through the back of the safe? I'm like, this is taking forever. Somebody is bound to catch on, especially because we keep seeing it's now 5 a.m. The florist down the street is down there and the delivery man is driving by. It's like, oh my God, they don't have a lot of time here. Very tense.
It really felt like we were with them all night. And it was, I mean, the floor, I couldn't help but think of Le Trou because of the experience with the floor. I mean, the hammering through these, through the plaster, the floorboards, the whole thing just reminded me of our obsession with using this sort of experience of sound and texture to build tension. And Dassin does that so exceptionally well here, right? Every time they're chipping away, every time they're picking up lifting up the umbrella and pulling out these giant clumps of plaster and cement, I'm just riddled with fear for these guys. I mean, it was just such a great experience there. And interestingly, according to the great source of all things movie, Wikipedia, the heist scene itself was based on an actual burglary in 1899 in Marseille, where a gang broke into this travel agency and cut a hole in the floor and used the umbrella to catch the debris in order to make off with the contents of the jeweler's shop below. It's cleverly portrayed on screen here, and legitimate. It happened. I think that's great. Although I do wonder what happened to the couple upstairs. We never come back to them. They're tied up, they're gagged, and they just sit there all night. They don't make any fuss.
I would assume that if they made a fuss that they would get silenced. You know, it was one of those things where I was wondering about that too. And I just assumed, by the time that our thieves actually leave, it's so close to opening that I'm assuming that the jewelers are going to come in,
somebody's going to
realize what happened. The police are going to come. Everyone's going to kind of realize, and then all of a sudden they're going to find that couple upstairs. So I can't imagine that they're tied up that long.
That long after 7 hours.
After the initial long time.
Okay, and then when we're in there, that is the experience of time passing is excruciating. I thought we weren't going to get through it with the floor, but the safe, the intensity of drilling through that safe, all to get to that tiny hole, and the weight of the safe. Did you think, how many heist movies have we seen where they actually decide to go in through the back of the safe? That seems brilliant. Yeah. More should do that. There's always this cracking of the safe and the stethoscope on the door, and we're all trying to do that. But just drill through the back of the safe. Safe makers cheaping out in the back of the safe.
Well, it still took them hours to get through it. It was still a very long time.
If you have the time. Anyway, so that's the heist, and that's really, I think, the central element of the film that makes this sort of stand out, and it sets the bar for intensity, but it doesn't really end there because everything falls apart over the course of the remainder of the film.
This type of film, like the crime films, if you look at the crime films in the U.S. in the 20s and 30s, even into the 40s, that were made at the time of the production code, and I think we talked about this back when we did one of the crime films that we covered in, I can't remember which series, but that was very much a particular example of how, because of the production code, you could have a story about criminals, but it had to end with them getting caught. It had to end poorly for them. And, I think that certainly that vibe kind of came through in the noir films, not necessarily for the same reasons. This film, I mean, we definitely are set up with some of these criminals where, they aren't necessarily doing nice things. And so it makes sense that we're like left in a place where they don't necessarily get away with things in the end. That certainly is the case with this film. I don't know if that was particularly the reason why they chose to end the novel that way, if it was just based on the way that the novel really ended. I'm not really sure. But it definitely has that bleak feel, which I think works in context of the story with these criminals that, we see Tony, beating on his ex-girlfriend at one point, and it was kind of this horrible, strange little moment of abuse that we had. And so I was like, well, I don't feel like they're setting us up where we necessarily like these characters. Maybe Mario and Caesar a little bit, but they're
funny. They're the funny guys,
right? I mean, but at the same time, I just found them all really interesting characters. I guess because the setups and stuff with some of the characters, particularly that bit with Tony, I guess I didn't end up being surprised with the way that the film ended.
Tony, I think, was the most interesting character for me in that perspective specifically, because everybody else, right, Joe and Mario and Caesar, they're progressive about their crime, right? They're progressive criminals, right? They're doing it, but you don't see them actively, doing something reprehensible in the movie, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
They're just sort of like, it's Tony, who is this aging ex-con who comes out and gets so riled up about his love for this woman and that she has betrayed him by moving on to this other gangster that he goes and beats her with a belt. And we don't actually see that. And I think that's another interesting choice that Dassin makes here by putting it, having them move into the other room, and the whole experience of having her take off her dress in the doorway and then move into the other room where we hear him beating her with this belt, and then they come out and she doesn't say anything and they just get dressed, and it's it's grotesque, and it really does do what you're describing here. It makes him that sort of reprehensible character in a way that reminds us that they're all criminals, because I don't think Joe and Mario and Caesar do that. Joe and Mario and Caesar, I'm okay with them just being kind of the bumbling, happy-go-lucky, thieves. It's Tony who's the straight-up bad guy.
Mario and Joe certainly seem like, they have home lives. Joe has a family with, kid.
Right.
And
totally
it seems like
Joe.
It seems like the criminal world, that's just what they do as their day job. They just, I'm just going to work, get my money. I come home. Exactly. I've got my family to feed. It doesn't feel like they even really view it as necessarily being a part of the criminal underworld. It's just kind of their job. It's strange. But Tony definitely does take that different turn. And I mean, he is the one who we meet fresh out of prison. He's released and back out into the real world. And then these guys are hitting him up for this new plan and everything. And I do think it's interesting also that just at a point where we feel like we may have kind of started forgetting about, or put farther in the back of our mind as to what Joe did and how he treated his girlfriend, we do end up seeing the results on her back later in the film as to exactly just how brutal of a lashing he gave her.
Well, and ends up making Grutter, the thug, kind of, it sort of rehumanizes him as he discovers that she's been hit. Like it's who's the good bad guy and who's the bad guy anymore in this movie. This movie dances back and forth across the line a number of times, and it makes it at the real climax when Joe finally gives in to his anxiety and takes the money and goes to the house, and we have the ultimate shootout there. That is. It ends up being very intense, and even though we know Joe is the guy who stole all this stuff and went to London and hawked the jewels and got the money, it's still, with great grieving that we have that he actually loses it. And I think that moment when Tony goes back to the house and we have that fantastic shot of Joe on the stairs and Tony right next to him, it's incredibly powerful because you know that Tony's the guy who's going to have to, try to clean this up because he's the only one of the four of them with the skills and the sort of emotional aptitude to do it.
Yeah, he is the one who seems to have the smarts as to how to put a plan into place. Like they have an idea as to what they do. And initially, I mean, they don't even come to him for this big plan. They come to him to just steal, I think it's just a jewel or a couple jewels that are kept in the case at the front of the store. They're just going to cut window. Through the glass, take the stuff, and that was all that they had planned. He sees it as a much bigger opportunity of taking a lot more from the jewelry store and actually doing a full-on robbery with getting all the loot out of there, which I thought was definitely something that you see with Tony, is he's, I guess you would say, the brains of the operation. He's the one who really knows how to put a plan into place.
One might call Tony Dassin's Hudson Hawk. You might.
Sure. I guess we could go that route.
And while I'm on the subject, is it any coincidence that Frank Stallone and Carmine Zazora played Caesar Mario and Tony Mario, respectively, in Hudson Hawk? And our protagonists here, Andy, are Tony, Caesar, and Mario.
The ways
now that it's in our catalog, Andy, now that Hudson Hawk is in the catalog, prepare for more of these kinds of gems.
The webs that you weave, Pete. The webs that you weave. Oh boy. Going back to you just brought up some of these characters and our bad guy Gruder. I do think that it's interesting that here we have Tony established as the guy who will beat his girlfriend because she hooked up with another guy while he was in prison. But then we also have Gruder, the bad guy, who is using his brother, who has a heroin addiction, and kind of using that as a way to get his brother to do his bidding, which I thought was an interesting thing that I wasn't expecting, because so often in these crime stories where you have somebody who I guess you would call like the head of the organization, people are just doing stuff for him because they're a part of the organization. I think that this was the first time that I had seen, somebody in the organization doing something just because the person who is the head of the organization was giving him the fix that he needed,
Yeah, this is probably the saddest of the relationships in the movie in terms of the criminal relationships that the Gruder brothers were using one another like this, right? That it's a criminal organization first and a family second. Mm-hmm. That I'm going to use you for your sort of temperament as a murderer, and I'm going to drug you, and I'm not going to look after you. I'm not going to keep you healthy. And you think in the beginning when he hides the drugs, there's that first interaction where Remy is in there digging through the desk, and Elder Gruder comes in and like takes the drugs away. That you think, okay, maybe it's actually a good relationship, which is totally thrown in the can later on when he gives him all the heroin he needs, all the heroin he wants, and then says, go take care of this guy.
You're right. To a certain extent, though, this film really is about these addictions. I mean, these guys, Tony and his team, they have such a hard time saying no to this just because the payoff is so potentially good. Just like Remy can't say no to the drugs, and like Caesar can't say no to the women. And it's interesting that these little addictions that they all have is really kind of what gets all of them busted, right? I mean, because Gruder and his guys, they figure out the plan because Caesar gives this ring to this I guess you'd call her a prostitute, this dancer in this club that Gruder runs, and they find out who he is and through her, and are able to kind of figure the whole plot out as far as who's got all the loot. Just the same, Tony and his guys are able to figure out, well, specifically Tony, I guess, where Gruder and his team are by using the addiction and using that to their advantage by getting this guy who delivers the drugs to to do so, and they follow him out there. So it's interesting the way that all of this is what really kind of unravels everything for people.
Well, and also reminds you that the movie is about both this heist and effectively petty theft, right? Breaking and entering, smash and grab, and organized crime, right? It's crime against crime. And the movie is a little bit subtle on the organized crime part until we get to this, like, casually using drugs for murder and, kidnapping kids at the end, which we haven't gotten to yet. I mean, ultimately, Grutter tries to motivate action here on getting the loot, stealing the loot from the thieves by kidnapping Joe's child. Young child. How old is the kid?
Tonio. He's real young. I can't remember how old Tonio is.
Little kid, but he's and kidnaps him and takes him to the country house.
5-year-old son.
5-year-old son.
Yeah.
And cute, adorable. This kid, real sweetheart. So he kidnaps him, and they end up taking fine care of him in this country house, and it leads to, I think, the second most intense sequence of the film, which is at the very end, the drive from the country house through Paris, where we have Tony, who has been shot and is bleeding out. And the way they use the camera to capture the blood as it drips down his leg and on his fingers, it is terrifying. He's in a convertible, and Tonio is unbelted, just climbing all over the place in this car. And it must be 5 minutes of driving through intercut sequences of driving through Paris. And I'm on the edge of my seat. I hated that. I'm like staring at the movie through fingers.
That was so tense because it's like, okay, this kid is going to fall out because Tony is having a hard time paying attention because he's dying as he's trying to drive the kid home to get him back to his mom. Also, he's got the suitcase full of all the money. So he's trying to make off with that. The suitcase is in the backseat next to this kid who's all over the place. So I'm like, okay, the kid's going to fall out of the car, or he's going to knock the suitcase out of the car, or someone's going to think that he's, something's going on because he also is waving a toy gun around. And it's just incredibly tense. And we do finally get them home, and just as Tony dies and kind of crashes into the wall, and just passersby happened to as they come upon the car accident scene, and Tonio's mother comes out and gets him. We have just passersby in this group surrounding the car who find the suitcase, and that's the end of the crime, and everything has been taken care of.
That's right. And now everybody's dead.
Everybody's dead. The only one who really makes off is the one who took all the jewelry, who bought it all in London. Theoretically, he still has all the jewels and can pawn it and still make money for himself.
Oh, that's right. The London
London fence.
The London fence. He's okay. But there is a one particular assassination that I think is worth pointing out, and that's the scene where Tony kills Cesar, because Cesar betrayed the group, and that was not in the book, that sequence, but it leads back to Dassin's experience. As I think you introduced last week, Dassin's experience being named a communist in the 1950s. You want to talk a little bit about the backstory, getting it made?
We talked a little bit about it already, and like you said, Dassin was he's an American filmmaker, but he had been named on the blacklist by director Edward Dmytryk, who named him a communist to the House Committee on Un-American Activities. And so he went to Europe because he couldn't get any work and was trying to figure out what to do. Jean-Pierre Melville was actually going to be directing Rififi, but Dassin came over and I guess he was just looking for some work. He was kind of poking around, and he's made some great films. I mean, I don't know if we've really talked much about work that he's done, but before this, he did The Naked City, Thieves Highway, Night in the City, some really fantastic films, kind of right in the prime of the noir period. And I think some of these French filmmakers kind of respected the work that he had been doing. So Melville gave him his blessing to do this film. As you mentioned, Dassin did not really like this screenplay. He did not like this book that it was based on. So when he went in to write the script for this, which I guess he and Renee Wheeler wrote in 6 days, which is nuts how quickly they turned it around. And then Renee translated it all to French once he did it. He took some of those moments of his experience with the Blacklist, and in particular, the one that you're talking about how Caesar is the one who kind of named names, and this is what you do. You don't break those unwritten rules, and Tony kills him, and that was a really fantastic scene. It was just done really well. The way that Caesar kind of acknowledged and knew what was going to happen, the way the camera kind of pulled back as Tony kind of went to the doorway to get ready for it. All of it was just done really well. But I don't know. I think that in the process of writing this script and finding the right way to tell it, I think Dassin really found ways to get rid of all the stuff from the book that didn't work, like you had mentioned, the different ethnicities that were originally in the book with, I can't remember, it was some North Africans, I believe.
Yeah.
And
they were dark Arabs, quote unquote.
And North Africans, wasn't it? Both?
Yeah, North Africans,
it's two different rival gangs.
Two different rival gangs.
Yeah. And just kind of found a way to kind of focus on the heist itself, but also had these moments that he was able to kind of pull in from his own life. I thought it was a pretty sharp way to put this story together.
I do too. And it was Wheeler who wanted to make the gangsters Americans. And it was Dassin who said, no. We're not gonna do that. We just got rid of the other racist stuff. Let's just make this a crime story and see how that goes out. Getting it released in the US was full of some other complications, however, obviously, because Dassin was had been blacklisted. Seems like a nice little shell game in order to get this in theaters.
Not just because of that, although that certainly was a part of it. And yeah, we didn't really say. I mean, he didn't have a big budget with this. Not a lot of big stars either. It was very, kind of a minimal production that he put together here. In the process of getting it released, though, first of all, they were running into issues with a lot of countries not even wanting to release the film because of the way it depicted crime. They some of these countries felt that this was way too realistic, and it was basically I think Mexico banned it because there were burglaries that were mimicking the heist scene. Finland banned it because the heist scene was too realistic. A lot of critics actually said that the film seemed like an educational process, teaching people how to commit burglary. Dassin, his response was, we're trying to show you how hard it is to actually pull this off. I mean, it was a very difficult thing that these guys had to put into place. It was, I think in the UK, it speaks to the British, I guess. It was one of the most successful. It was released on a double bill. It was one of the most successful double bill releases that they had. But then, as you mentioned, over here in the States, because of Dassin being on the blacklist, they would not distribute it, whoever they reached out to, unless that he renounced his past and declared that he was duped into subversive associations. Otherwise, they said if they released it, they would remove his name as writer and director. He refused. Eventually, United Artists, they set up a dummy corporation as the distributing company and distributed it with his name in the credits. And that's one of the first places where the Hollywood blacklist was cracked, which is always great when these little things start happening. I know Dalton Trumbo and Spartacus was a big one that happened when Kirk Douglas refused to take his name off of the credits, and that was 5 years after this. But I think this film, I guess it's. It claimed the place of breaking the blacklist, even though it was largely kind of filmed as a French film and then breaking the blacklist coming in. Spartacus was, I guess, a little different because it was a full-on U.S. production that had a blacklisted writer's name on it.
The Catholics didn't like it either, and I just want to highlight the Roman Catholic Legion of Decency.
Yes.
Great. What do you think their lair looks like?
Oh my!
Sorry, I'm sorry to the Roman Catholic Legion of Decency. I'm sorry, but come on, that name,
Right?
Anyway,
I'm sure it's cloaks like an Eyes Wide Shut.
Right.
Although I highly doubt that they have scenes like an Eyes Wide Shut. So much for the decency part.
Right.
Oh.
Exactly. So they were able to get a few cuts, and they got a title card added to the film from the Book of Proverbs, quote, "When the wicked are multiplied, crime shall be multiplied, but the just shall see their downfall." And I think that's grammatical attribution error, because I don't know if we're talking about the just falling or if the just are seeing the wicked fall. I think that should be clarified. So let's call for some edits to the Bible. Because
let's get right on that.
Unclear, and I worry about the outcome for the just.
You know, we didn't mention in the U.S. when it was released, they did dub it at one point in one of the releases, and they renamed it Rififi means trouble! ! Just to help emphasize the meaning of the title. Yeah.
I think that was the Legion of Decency too. They wanted it to be really clear.
Right.
Rififi's bad. 1956. So we mentioned a couple of the films that Dassin had done. Would you call yourself a Dassin fan? Do you know a lot of these movies?
I do have, let's see, The Naked City and Thieves Highway. I have both of those at home. Criterion did some nice releases of those, and The Night in the City as well. So yeah, those are three great films of his that I have seen some solid stuff. I don't know if I've seen much else of his. I know he did Brute Force before those, another crime kind of film noir. But I mean, he had done films from the early 40s all the way up to 1980 that he was directing. And I feel like I need to watch more of his stuff, because I do really like this run of 4 films right here.
Mm-hmm. And there are, I have not seen enough of his films. I've seen Night in the City, but I think that might be it. And so my question here is around seeing him going to Europe and directing this film in French. Is there a comparison to be made between his English language films? Like, how well does he handle? Because we have been critical in the past of directors coming and directing English language films, for whom English is not maybe their first language. And so I'm curious how his direction of French holds up.
I feel like he does a good job here. I mean, I don't know if what other people have said, but I feel like the films that he had done were so kind of just noirish anyway, that coming off of those 3, especially right into Rififi, it just seems like the language barrier almost doesn't even seem like it was there. It works so well in context of how the stories flowed one into the other. You know, it was a nice series of kind of dark noirish films, and here he is doing another kind of crime film, and I feel like there's less of a language barrier going this way, and that's as an English speaker coming in and watching this. I don't know if the French watch them and can feel a kind of a different sense of their stories. But I mean, just coming off of Le Trou and then just leading into Les Samurai, I don't know. I feel like this kind of fits in with the vibe of films, and it certainly feels like it fits into the noir films as well of the American side.
I think so too. And it really makes me want to go back and maybe put together a little series. Maybe it's Brute Force and Naked City and Night in the City and
Thieves Highway.
Yeah, exactly. We kind of build up our collection of Dassin films. I really enjoyed what he brought to this. The cast, obviously, the one thing we didn't mention in terms of, we've talked about Tony and Joe and Mario. It's Jean Servais and Carl Milner and Robert Manuel, but Jules Dassin himself played Caesar, and he says, "I had a very good actor cast already, but the guy never got the contract. So I put on the mustache and I do the part myself." Which,
of course, he's
and
credited as Perlo Vita.
Yes,
just to I don't know, not make it seem like he's all over the place, I guess. But
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Not quite so obvious. Anybody else in the cast you want to highlight?
I definitely think that I don't know, Jean Servais as the lead, as Tony. He has just a presence on screen that feels very. It works really well for crime.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think that there's something about the time that he wears on his face, and he just feels like a world, like a weary man. And as he's kind of starting off this film, playing cards, everything, and just down on his luck, he wears that. He just feels like a guy who's just kind of this hangdog sort of look, but also you can tell that he's got that intelligence behind him. So wizened to the world, weary with it, but going along with this crime anyway. I couldn't help but be constantly enamored by him as our lead character, regardless of whether he was doing terrible acts or in the middle of his act of crime. I just found him to be really mesmerizing.
They got him. I think they got him on the cheap because he was having some of his own struggles in his career, dealing with alcoholism, and so he has a robust list of credits. But at this point, it seems like he was really struggling, and Dassin gave him this part again because for all of the reasons you just described, he ends up being incredible, but got him on the cheap because he was struggling and he wasn't being cast elsewhere. So glad that he ended up in here because I think he lends a lot. The weight of a lot of this, of the emotional struggle of this film is right on his shoulders.
No, he did a great job. I think all the cast, they fit the roles really well. Whether it's Dassin himself playing Caesar, or looking at the rest of the gang, Carl Milner as Joe, Robert Manuel as Mario. I just think that this group just worked really well. And actually, Groder also, I thought, had just a really kind of in the parlance of being the bad guy. I think that he had a look that actually made him look more like the bad guy rather than a good bad guy.
Okay, so this is widely classified as quintessential film noir, camera, Philippe Agostini.
Overall, the film has a look that does feel noirish. The black and white, I think, works really nicely in this film. I do feel that what I really appreciated when it came time to do the actual heist, the camera work kind of just stayed back and kind of let it come through as a pretty straightforward crime. We were just kind of watching, and in doing so, it helped with the tension. I thought it was very effective.
Describing the camera as staying back a little bit, particularly the sort of very wide low shot of the downstairs as we get generally Tony walking back and forth, kind of looking out the front door, builds an incredible amount of intensity and reveals elements of the set that allow you to sort of experience the anxiety of the space. Like it's covered in windows. And so in one place, you're looking at Tony as he's walking over by the door, and then he turns around and walks back, and you see just how close the safe is to being visible from the street. Like what these guys were attempting to do was a terrifying act for their own physical safety. And I think the camera goes to great lengths to give us that sense of space and lends to the anxiety of the film. I think it is really special. I do think it's interesting the way they play with hammering through the floor and the just the angle that the camera gets on the hammering. Maybe there just aren't very many angles to get on hammering through a floor, but I'm wondering now after Letroux's hammering through the floor and this hammering through the floor, do we get any solid hammering through the floor scenes in Le Samurai, which I have yet to watch. So very excited about our trio of hammering through the floor films,
I feel you may end up finding yourself disappointed with that one.
Curses.
I know we apparently built the wrong French crime series. We really needed to incorporate floor digging in all three to really tie it all together.
That's right. We missed a huge opportunity. Anyway, Philippe Agostini does some great work, and it also makes me curious about some of his other films of the era too. He was very busy at this part of his career.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
George Auric signed on to do the music. Interesting use of music and sound, and in particular, our highlight sequence of the heist. There is no music, but there does exist score to accompany it.
The score, I haven't listened to. Did you find that score? The score that was designed to accompany it?
I have not, but the story, as I understand it, is that Dassin said, we're not going to have music during this thing. And Auric says, yes, you are. You're going to shoot it and you're going to say, God, I wish I had score for this thing. And you're going to want to be protected. His words, I'm going to protect you, Jules. I'm going to write you the score for this half-hour sequence because you cannot do a half-hour sequence without music. So he shoots it. They cut it together. He sits down next to Auric and he plays the sequence. And Auric says, you're right. There needs to be no music. So the score has been written for this sequence, and they both agreed not to use it. I thought that was nice.
Really interesting. I would love to know if it ever did get a release, though, so you could at least hear what...
I don't think it did.
Yeah,
exactly. I would be very curious to hear how they chose to score something like that.
Yeah.
How they would have chosen to score. Did you like the music otherwise?
I did. I did like the music. And actually, Georges Auric does have a cameo in the film, too, as one of the card players at the beginning of the film. So he gets to pop in there, which was nice. I do, just going back to that song, circling back, I do think it's...
the dance number?
Yeah, the Rififi song. I do think it's telling that later in his life, Dassin did admit that he regretted having that song in there because it is a title never mentioned by characters. It's never really anything. And I guess he felt it was a little too much, having to feel like we were spelling it out for the audience, Although though to that end, I would say if there was no mention of it, I would constantly going, is somebody named Rififi? Like, what is this? Where does it come in? Are we going to finally get the big reveal that, there's a person in charge of all this that's named Rififi? What is it? So
I agree. It's too much. I think it is a silly song. However, I think the way they shot that sequence, the dance sequence in the middle of the movie in the club, I thought was really lovely. So take the song out of it, make it another song. I actually really liked the shadow dance that they did, and I thought it was well placed and interesting to watch and compellingly shot and well performed. So I am thumbs up on having something there, but Rififi, making it the Rififi song, it just confuses the story.
I guess I don't feel like it confuses the story. Honestly, I don't know if I mind it that much because in the period with the 50s crime films and noir films, there was definitely a trend of songs being performed in them that, may not have been quite so directly tied into the title of the film, but certainly they had songs in these films. And I guess to that end, I feel like it was more of the era than anything else. It doesn't necessarily make me feel like, well, no one was doing this. It just feels completely out of place. It feels of the era. So I guess to that end, it doesn't end up kind of bugging me too much.
But is it of the era as a song in the middle of the movie? My memory of other examples, it's those are songs that are like credit songs, opening credits.
Oh no, there's definitely performances in the middle of a movie. You know, you look at something like, we've talked about it on the show, Key Largo, which was can't remember which series we did that in, but that was, I think, Bogart. That was a film that had a performance in the middle of the movie, and I think that there were a number of those films in the period that had performances that happened in the middle of the film. So I guess I don't find that it's out of place.
Well, I guess that's not what I mean, but I don't remember the performance in the middle of the film. Was it the performance in the middle of the film to describe why the film was called Key Largo, or to describe
I'm not
elements?
I'm not saying that's what I'm saying. They weren't necessarily named the title of the film or anything like that.
Yeah,
but they were performances in the middle of the film, and so
just so we're clear, you and I are in violent agreement.
Yeah, I'm just in this particular case because Rififi is something that nobody knows what it is. The fact that it is saying what it is, I guess in the end, I find that it doesn't bug me too much.
I absolutely agree, mostly.
I'm glad we're in somewhat strong agreement.
I'm only making the feeble case that I'm not crazy about the fact that it is Rififi as the song, because it is the title of the movie and I don't need it. But I do love that there's a performance there. Also, I don't care that much. So,
well, here's the thing. I hear that Dassin actually named the movie after the song because he was so taken by the song. It's like, that's a great name for a movie.
I also actually
what do you know? It happens to be all about criminals.
Le Breton actually wrote the book about the song. It's crazy. It all goes back to this song.
Yes, it does. Oh boy,
goodness, I'm exhausted. Okay, that's all I got. You want to do we have any sequels and remakes?
There was talk of it. This was 15 years ago now, so I don't think anything's happening with it. But Stone Village Pictures did acquire the rights to do a remake of Rififi. They were going to put it in a modern setting. Al Pacino was going to play the Tony character. Like I said, that was 15 years ago and nothing has come of it. So I have a feeling that at this point, I don't think anything is going to come of that. And I have heard nothing new. So that's where it sits.
Pacino, was it going to be Tony Rififi? That would be good. That would just clear it up, right? Nobody would ask.
That would be his last name.
And they just call him Fief?
Right.
Hey, Fief.
The Fiefster.
The Fiefster. Fiefmeister. All right. Okay, so how to do an award season. Pretty popular film. It's got to have done some good.
It was a good film. It got noticed. It was, as we said, not necessarily the film that a lot of countries wanted to play, but it still was noticed in certain circles, like the Cannes Film Festival, where Jules did walk away with a tie, actually, for Best Director. He tied with Sergei Vasilev for the film Heroes of Shipka. The film itself was nominated for the Palme d'Or, but lost to one of your favorites, Marty, a film that we have talked about on the show.
Are you kidding me?
The French Syndicate of Cinema Critics did give Jules the Critics Award for Best Film. Over here in the U.S., at the National Board of Review, they gave it the National Board Top Foreign Film Award. At the New York Film Critics Circle Award, this was in the year 2000, they gave Jules Dassin a special award for the ingenious distribution pattern, as well as their choice of films. And the Online Film and Television Association, this was just a couple years ago. It did actually win, or it was entered, I guess. That's what winning is, into their Hall of Fame. So it's a film that people have been noticing and talking about how influential it is and how great it is. And, it's definitely a film worth looking at and talking about.
Hopefully it did some good at the box office.
Well, like last week, there is not a lot of information out there about this film. The only information I could find is that Dassin had a meager budget of $200,000, which is about $1.9 million in today's dollars. That is, and I just said dollars. That being said, I'm not sure if it's actually the franc or the dollar. So even that information may not be accurate. Regardless, the movie was released April 13th, 1955 in France, then played at Cannes a few weeks later, and it finally made its way to the U.S. shores June 5th, 1956. Again, we talked about its release as far as how it got released. This was the same week as Hitchcock's The Man Who Knew Too Much and Kubrick's The Killing, interestingly enough, talking about a great week to go watch some new releases.
That's fascinating that it gets such a close release to The Killing after coming out in Europe a year earlier.
Yeah, exactly.
That's amazing. Timely. Well, I'll tell you what, I had a great time with this movie. Just a wonderful experience. And like last week, I'm eager to see where the stars fall as we rank it.
Definitely. Let's do it.
Head over to flickchart.com/thenextreel, and you'll see all of the movies that we've talked about on this very show. If you swipe over in your show notes and tap the word Flickchart, it'll take you straight to Rififi, where you can add it to your list and see how it stacks up against ours.
First up, we have Rififi or Videodrome.
Rififi.
I will take Rififi. Rififi or All of Me. I will take Rififi. Rififi or Scott Pilgrim versus the World.
Oh, Scott Pilgrim versus the World.
Yeah, Scott Pilgrim. Rififi or L.A. Confidential. L.A. Confidential
L.A.
for
Confidential.
Me.
Yeah.
Rififi or Creed 2.
Creed 2.
Creed 2 for me. Rififi or Live Free or Die Hard. I got to go with John McClane.
I think you're Live Free. Yeah, I'm going to go Live Free too.
All right. Rififi or Seven Samurai.
Seven Samurai.
Yeah, I'll say Seven Samurai. Rififi or Rocky Balboa.
Rocky Balboa.
I will say Rififi on this one. We're going to have to go to the mat.
Really? Really?
Yes.
You're gonna talk
Rocky
about
Balboa
bombs?
had no shadow dancing, Pete.
It had him blasting kegs. Okay, let's do it.
All right, here we go. 1, 2, 3.
Scissors. Paper.
Rock. Rocky Balboa wins.
Andy. Oh, Andy.
Rififi or Raise the Red Lantern. Oh, I got to go Raise the Red Lantern.
I will also go Raise the Red Lantern.
Well, that lands Rififi in spot 110 on our chart. 110 out of 440 films, which is pretty good. It's about 75%.
Awesome. That's pretty good. It actually surprises me a little bit, especially when we get to our star ranking over at letterboxd.com/thenextreel. Where did you end up?
I went a little higher on my chart. It landed at spot 605 out of 4297, which is about an 86%.
I came out at 371 out of 1436, which is only a 74%. And that seems too low for me. If I'm to go by Flickchart's recommendation over at letterboxd.com, it should be a 3.5 star review. That's not right. That's not right. The question I had a great time with this movie. I don't know what happened on Flickchart. Flickchart broke it. So is this movie, is this a 5-star movie? Can you answer the question, where did the stars fall?
See, you keep putting it like that, and I end up feeling so guilty because last week you bullied me into raising my rating for Drew.
I did.
And this week I feel like I'm rating it at a 4.5 out of 5 with a heart. And I feel like it's just because if I'm comparing the two, I feel like, I like it just slightly less than the True.
Just slightly less than the True.
And I felt like in context of the I don't know, in context of the criminals and stuff, I had a harder time liking Tony and getting into him. The scene where they're actually robbing the stores. That's a 5-star scene though. It's pretty solid.
It is a 5-star scene, Andy. It's a 5-star scene. And anything that comes after that causes you to whittle the stars away, I think it's a fascinating question. What is that thing? Because for me, I didn't have anything that whittled the stars away. So for me, I'm going to go ahead and give it 5 stars and a heart, which is a massive conflict in my head that I have a movie that is sitting at 74% on Flickchart, but is a 5-star and a heart movie for me. I don't know how to reconcile that.
Well, that's the crimes of Flickchart.
Yeah.
Flickchart is a difficult difficult master.
Yeah, truly.
To live with. For me, I feel like the half star might have fallen in the first half before the crime. And then as much as I enjoyed everything afterward, I don't think it ever kind of quite got back up. But still, I feel really good about the 4.5 stars. And it is a film that I definitely would watch again. And who knows, it may be a 5-star next time.
Outstanding. All right. Well, let's go with that. And let's also note this is coming up going to be the end of our French crime film series, which I hope you don't disagree is, I am feeling, too short with just 3 films.
I'm definitely feeling that and definitely want to return to this series because so far, I mean, it's just been a joy watching all these movies.
Truly. So what are we going to do to wrap it up this year?
We're going to be jumping forward 12 years to 1967. We're going to be looking at Jean-Pierre Melville's Les Samouraïs with Alain Delon.
You've seen it already, right?
I have seen it, and I actually just rewatched it for the show, and I got to say, I'm really excited to talk about this one.
Are we going to go 3 for 3 5-star movies on my letterbox? I'm very excited about this. It's a lot of pressure. So much pressure.
It is.
When the movie ends,
our conversation begins.
Amazon giveth, Andy.
As Amazon always doeth.
Mm-hmm. Not a lot of people don't like this movie. And apparently, not a lot of people are complaining about the release, which is
the
weird.
1-star is complaining about the release. They're complaining about the subtitles being really short. Not enough time to read them.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. They even count how many times they have problems with them. They're very specific.
Very specific. We do have a couple of 2-star reviews that we can share at the very bottom of the barrel.
We do, yes.
Why don't you go first this week?
All right, here we go. This is by Anna Schlimovich. 2 stars, watched it on DVD, who has this to say. I have decided to rewatch this movie recently with a friend who has not seen it. I remembered from years ago that the film impressed highly, with its silent scene, of course, and the suspense. But as it went on this time, I found it incredibly long and boring. Also moralizing in somewhat naive sense that crime is futile, all bandits die at the end. Thus, it's not even realistic, while it's certainly made in that style. Of course, it's worth watching for its past merits, Jules Dassin, the father of the famous singer, and so on. But what is of value for a modern viewer? It seems it can be used as an advertisement by the cell phone industry. What a horrible life without the iPhone, could be one header. And secondly, it reinforces a stereotype that French women adore male brutality. The more she is abused, the more she is ready to serve. Story of R could be another title as well. The scene of the whipping is so pathetic and devalues the hero's presumed masculinity. Is whipping a woman the only thing he could do to her in the bedroom? This is a faded glory piece. It's history.
Yeah,
oh my.
Well, there's something to some of that.
Certainly the last part, the whipping and stuff. We kind of talked about that, and they are criminals, but yes.
I'm tempted to read the other 2-star review, but there are some comments on your review that I think are that young Werner called, and he said he really would like to get a piece of. In fact, to your review, Eric the Red responds, God, shouldn't you be somewhere watching a Justin Bieber YouTube video? Life on Earth didn't begin in 1996. Werner's sassy today. He's sassy. He
certainly is.
He certainly is. Ah, dear. Thanks, Amazon. It's hard to believe we have been having in-depth weekly conversations about movies since 2011.
Oh, you're telling me. Producing this show week after week is so much fun, but it does require a ton of work behind the scenes. If you'd like to help support our efforts, one easy way is by using our originals page when shopping for books and movies that we've covered.
your purchases made through our links give us a small commission at no extra cost to you and allow us to keep having these great discussions.
We are highlighting adaptations from Season 9 over at our Originals page, thenextreel.com/originals. That's the site where listeners can purchase the source material for all of our adapted film discussions.
We had a big Robin Hood series this season, looking at 9 different versions on screen. Many were likely adapted from Howard Pyle's The Merry Adventures of Robin Hood, including Douglas Fairbanks in Robin Hood, The Adventures of Robin Hood, Disney's Robin Hood Prince of Thieves, and the 1991 Robin Hood, and Ridley Scott's Robin Hood.
Robin and Marian was specifically based on the ballad, The Jest of Robin Hood.
And we really don't have too much to say about Robin and the Seven Hoods.
We talked Dead Ringers for our David Cronenberg series adapted from Barry Wood and Jack Geeslin's novel Twins.
Have you checked out that show?
You know, I haven't, but I've heard great things.
2 comedies from our Steve Martin series were adaptations, Pennies from Heaven from the BBC series, and The Lonely Guy from the book by Bruce J. Friedman.
The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas was part of our Colin Higgins series, adapted from the Broadway musical.
Spike Lee brought us Black Klansman from Ron Stallworth's memoir.
And we looked at a trio of John le Carré adaptations, The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, The Little Drummer Girl, and Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy.
Plus, all 3 movies in our Agnieszka Holland series were based on books, Europa, In Darkness, and Spore.
La Cage aux Folles and its remake The Birdcage both came from Jean Poiret's original play.
We also talked about Arsenic and Old Lace and Charade in our Cary Grant series.
All of these were based on other material, and it is all available on our Originals page, thenextreel.com/originals. Every book purchased supports the podcast.
Get the full list of adaptations we've covered and start your next read today at thenextreel.com/originals.